Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the EMDR Maven podcast. I'm Julie Miller, and I'm an EMDR-approved basic and advanced EMDR trainer, an EMDR Institute regional trainer, an EMDR-approved consultant, and a certified EMDR therapist. I provide training and other resources through the EMDR Development Center, and you can learn more about that at the website, emdrdevelopment.com. This is season 2, and we're going to be discussing the use of EMDR therapy with the treatment of addictions of all kinds, substance and behavioral. And that's all we're going to be talking about this season. I host an EMDR no-fee study group on the last Wednesday of each month, online, except for December, from 12 noon to 12:50 p.m. Arizona time. This group is for anyone who's completed EMDR basic training. You can just send me an email and I'll be glad to send you the link to the meeting. You can email me at jmiller4721@gmail.com. Please get in touch with me. Let me know you want to attend. We have a special guest for the podcast episode today. This is Susan Brown. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a seasoned psychotherapist with over 35 years in private practice in San Diego, California. She specializes in the treatment of complex developmental trauma, addictions, and other maladaptive coping patterns. Her clinical approach integrates internal family systems processes with the EMDR therapy standard protocol, in addition to brain spotting. These integrated approaches reflect her commitment to nuanced, client-centered care. Susan served as principal investigator in a pioneering pilot study that applied an EMDR integrated trauma treatment program within an adult drug court setting. She has co-authored multiple book chapters and scholarly articles and is widely recognized for her expertise in working with complex trauma populations. A sought-after educator, Susan presents nationally on the integration of EMDR and IFS, offering specialty workshops and advanced trainings. She has been a regular presenter at EMDR conferences, including plenary sessions and full-day pre-conference institutes. In addition to her clinical work, she is an EMDR-approved consultant and facilitator for basic training, mentoring clinicians in the application of EMDR with complex clients. I've known Susan for quite a while, and I'm very glad that she's willing to come and share her extensive experience and knowledge in using EMDR with addictions. So let's welcome Susan. Well, thank you so much, Susan, for being willing to come and talk with me and with our listeners today. EMDR and addiction is a topic that I get asked about a lot, especially when I'm doing basic trainings and newer clinicians that are working with a lot of addiction. So I really want to hear from you today about how you use EMDR in working with your addiction clients. The first question I have is, how did you get involved or interested in EMDR at the beginning for you?
I was captured by a colleague, I kid you not, who came to my office door and said, "You've got to go get EMDR trained." And I asked her a little about it, and she told me, and I said, "I'm sorry, but I'm not going to sit in front of my clients and wave my fingers." And she said, "It is not like you, Susan, to be so closed-minded." So she left it at that. That, of course, sent me right to the training. I took a friend with me. I said, "If I'm going, you're going." And 2-3 days later, life was very different. And I had already been a therapist probably 13, 14 years by the time I got trained in 99. So that's how I got trained.
You were kidnapped.
I was kidnapped, is right. Challenged, insulted, and kidnapped.
Well, it was the perfect way to do it, it sounds like, is for her to challenge you.
Yeah.
Tell me about how you use EMDR with addiction clients.
It's complicated. The standard EMDR protocol is wonderful for trauma work directly. But because addictions are complicated, they're neurological as much as they are, trauma-based and based in attachment issues. There are certain things that you are not about trauma. So trauma is a necessity. To clear that is a necessity, but it is not sufficient for working with these complex clients. In my cravings are not trauma. Urges aren't trauma. Positive feeling states aren't trauma, but they are all wonderful targets for adapting the principles of the AIP and EMDR to addictions, compulsions, other maladaptive behaviors. I also integrate parts work, which has been around really forever in different forms.
Right.
I think I was trained in Gestalt 30, 40 years ago. But my preference for integration with addiction is internal family systems. And maybe mostly because of the alignment of these two therapies, that organic healing mechanism that everybody has.
So that Richard Schwartz, that's part of his theory, is about this innate healing system.
That's right. And that was part of Francine's introduction about EMDR. And so in many ways, they just line up perfectly. So instead of thinking about there being a client in front of me, when it comes to addiction or compulsive behavior, I'm curious about what part or parts, it's usually more than one when it comes to something like addictions, that are stuck in that particular role. So in standard EMDR, we are talking to our client, we're asking them about a negative belief they have about themselves and all the subsequent questions. But in the integration of parts work and EMDR, you are accessing a part that's somehow connected to this behavior. And as we both know, addictions don't start out as a problem, they start out as a solution. To meet a part, to get to know a part, to find out what its purpose was, what its intention was, is a really important part of working with addiction with EMDR. And then introducing a part to an inner wise elder, if you will. I don't know how to explain the concept of self, really. There's 10 words for it. It's different than standard EMDR in that respect. So I usually start there.
I'm educated about IFS, and I can use some of the principles and the parts work and that sort of thing. But the idea of, going and getting another months-long training feels like I don't want to do that. And it's expensive. So have you done that whole thing? Do you feel like there's things that you really need to know more about to be able to integrate IFS with what you're doing?
That's such a wonderful question. So I think I've been using IFS for about 10 years. And if I could have gotten into an IFS level 1 training in the last 10 years, I would have. But you couldn't. You could not get
just
in.
Also full.
They were always full. They were full immediately. I was willing to spend the money, but you could not get in. And to this day, the complaints are still the same. So I decided if I couldn't go to them, I would bring them to me. And I picked and chose the trainers who had online courses. I've been to in-person ones for 2 days, especially with Frank Anderson, who is a wonderful trainer.
Yes.
And then I've probably done, 50, 100 hours of the trainings I could access. But as I say, parts work is parts work. It's been around forever.
Right.
And I had already used parts work. So it was not a big leap educationally. And because it aligned so beautifully with the EMDR, it was just a natural integration. That's what I have to say. So I tried things out, as I did with the EMDR with addiction
Right.
at the beginning, because, one of the rules was you don't do trauma work with people who are still using or early in their recovery. That's one of the myths. So, it's trial and error, like everything else that you try with integration. But I followed protocol. I did what I was taught to do, but I integrate everything. So I picked from AJ's work, I picked from Miller's work, I picked from Jim Knipe's work, and Michael Hassa, and all of the shoulders we stand on. And so I'm not as much of a protocol person as I am an integrationist. And I will use whatever works in the moment, the needs of a client in the moment. And I just feel grateful that there's a treasure trove of tools to access.
Would you say something about AJ? Because I don't know that everybody listening would know who AJ was. That's okay.
Oh, my goodness. AJ Popke is a seminal person who brought a seminal protocol to the world of EMDR called DETOR, desensitization of triggers and urge reprocessing. And AJ died a few years ago. It was a tremendous loss to the EMDR community and to the world, I think. He was a very, he was a one of a kind. He was a very unusual man. He became a good friend and a mentor. And he brought, I think, a very important piece of working with addicted clients, which is cravings and urges to use. And so the principles of the adaptive information processing model and EMDR was that if you targeted something that was stuck, that wasn't supposed to be stuck together, and that was maladaptive, that the process of using EMDR principles and procedures would unlink that which should not be linked. Well, that went to cravings and urges.
Yes.
And he went on to develop an entire many-step protocol, which I borrow from, just bits and pieces. I just could never hang with entire protocols, whether that was DETOR or feeling state protocol or the CraveX, or they all had a lot of steps that, at least the way I work, did not seem necessary. So I just picked the jewels out of each one and folded them in.
Now, what about, you also said Miller, and I want to distinguish between me, a Miller, and Robert Miller. So would you say something about that work as well?
That's true. Robert Miller, he ended up being a bit of a rebel in the EMDR community, but he did bring some important gifts, but they were very parallel with Jim Knipe. So Jim Knipe is the first person in my world who introduced targeting what's good about doing something, which is a positive feeling state.
Right.
And so we had already been doing that. But Jim's approach was extremely simple and, in my mind, very effective and efficient. Which was to ask what's good about doing this. What's the most positive thing? How positive does it feel on a 0 to 10 scale? And how do you notice it in your body? There may or may not be an image, but there weren't any cognitions, not to my recollection, as there aren't when you target craving, because it's a subcortical issue, not a cognitive issue.
Exactly.
And so I had already been familiar with Jim's work. We also went way back as far as myself and AJ. And when Miller came along, he introduced something similar, but much more expansive. It had a really long protocol to it.
Yes.
And that to me just becomes overwhelming, but you pick the gems out and you integrate them and you move on. So he developed the feeling state addiction protocol.
Yes. Yes. Which is, in my mind, a fascinating system to watch the client go through.
We watched it with Jim Knight. We did the same thing with Jim Knight.
Yeah. It's amazing. And I think there needs to be more work done with the feeling state addiction protocol, some more research. There's certain elements of it that I don't quite get. Like, it doesn't generalize from substances to substance, and with food, it doesn't generalize from one food to another food to another food. You have to work on each and every individual food that somebody might binge on, for example.
Well, is that what Robert Miller said, or is that what you have experienced?
I certainly have experienced that in working with clients. And then I cornered him at the Canada conference many years ago. And I said, look, this is what I'm finding with food. Is there a way to get this to generalize to all foods or any, all binge foods if someone uses food to binge, whatever? And he said, no, you have to do every single one. That was both my experience and that was what he said. And I just feel like there's got to be a way to adjust it so that it can generalize more. It doesn't generalize between substances either.
Well, if you think about the concept of his protocol, it's that there can be a different feeling state that goes with each of those items.
Right.
And so if you don't break them down, it wouldn't do any good to target and resolve the positive feeling states that are associated with heroin use, opiate use, if the positive feeling states associated with sugar or some other food thing, it wouldn't make sense that it would generalize because they're completely different feeling states. Well,
and I think what I asked him about and what I found interesting is that if you look at food as an addiction, it does not generalize to other foods. I wouldn't expect food and heroin to generalize, but also I would expect some of the elements of an eating disorder or binge foods to generalize. And that doesn't. But I think your point being that there are, maybe they do have some of the same feeling states, but not necessarily exactly the same kind of dynamic there.
And I think some of them probably do generalize as long as they are close enough in what you seek. But food is maybe the toughest of all.
Yeah.
Because there are so many choices to get compulsive about.
Yeah.
So many feelings we might seek or seek to avoid. And you have to eat.
Yeah.
You don't have to smoke or do opiates or speed. Or you don't have to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
I can see that being very difficult to generalize unless you get a pretty clear sweep.
Yeah. So I think that in particular, I haven't found useful with eating disorders, but with substances like alcohol, marijuana, that sort of thing, that's where I've mostly used it. And I do find it extremely effective. I haven't used it with any other behavioral addictions like gambling or spending or anything like that. Have you used any of these addiction protocols with any of the process addictions or behavioral compulsivities?
Yes. Gambling and pornography is probably the biggest behavioral addiction I'm treating nowadays. Gambling, yes. And I need to emphasize that I am not employing a protocol. Employing bits and pieces of these protocols. But then you have to add, what part are you dealing with?
Right.
How many parts are involved in that gambling behavior? How many solutions are being sought by those behaviors?
Yeah.
And so if you think of it that way, and that either you could call it parts within parts, or you can call it separate parts. It's however the system breaks down, which you assess as you go along. But if one part is gambling for one reason, protective, always protective, and another part has a whole other storyline those both have to be processed in some way.
Exactly.
The only other option is that you have this group approach where all the parts that are involved in a particular behavior, they get to know each other. They get to see that they have shared intentions to help this person. And then you might be able to do something bigger and more general with the group, like you would in group EMDR, where each one of them is focused on what their part of the role, and still be able to see it was intended to help, but if you look at it closely, it's just harming at this point. Oh, it helped once upon a time. So that's complicated about that, and that's why I can't use a protocol.
Yes.
That's why.
I totally get it. Yeah. Yeah. I think because it doesn't fit nice and neat into the protocols that we have. There's a lot of good stuff in them, but it's not nice and neat. Now, in your integration of IFS, do you use typically what they call the parts like exile, managers, firefighters, that sort of thing? Do you use that language or those concepts with your addiction clients?
Not particularly. It's their language. That's for teaching and for understanding what IFS is, but I'm using the language they're using.
The client.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a rule, yeah.
I do like the concept of the manager and firefighter as being preventive, essentially, or putting out the fire. So the manager is trying to prevent the exile getting triggered and distressed, and the firefighter is the one that goes in with the big hose and blasts things,
When all else has failed.
And that's the addiction. The addiction is the firefighter part. And it's just, I think it's a particularly illustrative kind of metaphor for addictions and folks and what they're trying to do with their addictions.
It is. It's wonderful. And I'll mention anybody who's really interested in a specialist with IFS and addiction would be Cease Sykes, S-Y.
Oh, I've heard, yes.
But one of the things she teaches, and so does Dick Schwartz, that a firefighter can become just part of the management system. They are maintaining and sustaining all the time, which makes them managers. Just very extreme managers.
Right.
It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah. Especially the language of IFS kind of helps me conceptualize what the function of some of these different parts are.
Yeah.
And understanding the exile is the part that's holding the trauma or in pain, or is the one that gets really dysregulated and is traumatized. And then these other parts are about trying to manage the situation and trying to put out the flames. So it kind of helps me understand, what do I need to do with a client, maybe resource-wise, or focusing on what we might want to use EMDR therapy to address. That I find that language helpful, but not, as you have said, helpful but not sufficient. So the broader ego state therapy, I think, is a little bit better fit for me in terms of the language I use with clients. It's not quite as prescribed or structured, maybe in that way.
And I don't use that language anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I will say this about the distress and the pain and the discomfort that is usually applied to exiles. Every part that's stuck in a role that they were forced into is in pain. It's distressed.
Yeah.
Those people pleasers, those perfectionists, those preemptive managerial parts, they all have their own EMDR to go through. That
makes sense.
What I'm here for, right?
And that rigidly sticking to any particular protocol, or like sticking rigidly to IFS or sticking rigidly to any particular protocol, is not going to serve the client because it's a little nuanced.
Very nuanced in an actual moment-to-moment way. And EMDR as an umbrella concept, for conceptualizing cases and using all those procedures, they're magical.
Mhm.
But not all by themselves.
Right.
Not for me and not for these complicated clients.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very much so. Thanks today for Susan Brown being with us. And this is only part one. We have lots more to talk about, and I hope you'll join us. So the next podcast episode will be the second part of a conversation with Susan Brown, and we'll be talking a lot about myths and beliefs about addictions and what needs to happen with the treatment of addictions, especially how we can integrate the use of EMDR therapy. So join us again then. Thanks so much for being with me. Remember, there's the EMDR development website where you can find a lot of things about trainings, free resources for therapists, and even free training. And then email me when you want to attend the last Wednesday of the month no-fee study group. You can email me at jmiller4721@gmail.com. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care.